Hey, let me ask you something. When a big company audits a supplier, what do you think it actually checks? Price, quality, delivery date. That's the whole list, right? Three boxes? Cheap enough, good enough, fast enough. That's how global manufacturing has worked for 40 years. But in July 2026, Nikkei Asia reported that SpaceX had started asking its suppliers something else entirely. And the question was strange. First, are any of these parts made by Chinese companies? Fair enough, you think. Components, origin. That's a normal supply chain question. Second, what brand are the security cameras in your factory? The routers? The network gear? Okay, that's getting specific. But still, equipment? And then the third question. The one that made people in the industry stop and look up from their paperwork? Are there any Chinese nationals working in the facility that builds our parts? Managers, engineers, line workers? Any of them. Anywhere. One industry executive told Nikkei that if the answer was yes, suppliers were asked to move those people off the project. Entirely. So this wasn't about parts anymore. It was about people. And honestly, that's where this story stops being simple. Stay with me. Let's slow down and get the facts straight, because this is the kind of story that gets distorted the moment somebody retells it. According to Nikkei Asia, SpaceX sent teams to inspect existing and potential suppliers and gave those partners two specific instructions. 1. Don't assign or hire Chinese nationals at facilities producing SpaceX products. 2. Don't use systems or equipment made by Chinese companies. And the inspections were detailed. Inspectors reportedly looked at factory surveillance systems and networking hardware. Hike vision gear, TP-Link gear, replace it, even if the plant sat in Vietnam or Poland or Texas. Location didn't matter. The origin of the equipment did. SpaceX was also reportedly building something it calls an NCNT supply chain, non-China, non-Taiwan. Because of what might happen in the strait, one supplier executive put it bluntly, the engineers we send to support SpaceX projects have to be non-Chinese nationals, or our products fail certification. SpaceX didn't respond to requests for comment. So everything you're about to hear rests on reporting, not on a company statement. Keep that in mind. Now here's where I want to put on a different hat. Forget geopolitics for a minute. Look at this purely as a hiring decision, because for a company like SpaceX, people aren't just staff. People are the technology. The rocket exists because somebody's brain built it. So how big is the pool you're cutting into? The National Science Foundation has the numbers, and they're bigger than most Americans assume. In 2024, foreign-born workers made up 22% of America's entire STEM workforce. And in science and engineering occupations specifically, 28%. Go higher up the ladder and it gets steeper. Among doctoral-level engineers working in the US, 58% were born somewhere else. And who are they? India and China top the list for foreign-born science and engineering workers. India 29%, China 12%. So when a company draws a line around Chinese nationals in its supply chain, it isn't trimming a rounding error, it's cutting muscle. Shea, Hurst, Jones, and Klenow found that as job barriers fell for women and Black Americans, better talent allocation explained 15 to 20% of U.S. growth. Different context, obviously, but the underlying rule travels. Filter people by category instead of capability, and the whole system produces less. Does that sound wrong? Another study found immigrants were 16% of U.S. inventors but produced 23% of patents, and 36% of innovation once spillovers count. Okay, but maybe that feels abstract. Nobody is actually shutting down American science. Except there's data on that too, and it's uncomfortable. NBER economists studied what happened after U.S.-China tensions escalated around 2016. Ethnically Chinese students became 15% less likely to enroll in American doctoral programs. And the ones who did come were 4% less likely to stay after graduating. Many went to other English-speaking countries instead. Chinese researchers already working in the United States became 8 to 11% less productive and 10% more likely to stop publishing entirely. Here's the part that gets me. The decline started before the formal policies did, before the China Initiative, before the visa restrictions, and it hit people with no ties to China at all. Third country nationals, second-generation Chinese Americans, people that nobody was investigating in the first place. A separate study of 113,000 scientists found Something similar after NIH foreign influence investigations began. Their citations dropped about 10%. Researchers call it a chilling effect. Not exclusion, just a feeling. Should I email this person? Should I co-author this? Science starts with questions. So at this point, you might be ready to write SpaceX off. Expensive, exclusionary, self-defeating. But wait, there's a turn in this story. Because SpaceX doesn't sell apps. It builds rockets, satellites, and networks that governments depend on, and it launches for NASA's Artemis program. There's Starlink, the consumer internet service. And then there's Starshield, which SpaceX describes as built specifically for government national security use. Earth observation, assured global communications, hosted payloads, plus extra cryptography so it can carry classified material. That's the company's own description. In June 2026, Reuters reported that Britain had begun moving military operational traffic onto Starshield. One of the first countries outside America to do it. Reuters had also reported that SpaceX raised the price it charged the Pentagon for Starlink, used to guide drones in operations against Iran. Fivefold. So think about what a supply chain means for a company like that. It isn't a logistics diagram, it's closer to a nervous system. Every supplier is a nerve ending, and a nervous system doesn't get to be relaxed about who's touching it. Fair or too convenient? And this is where I have to tell you, SpaceX isn't doing something invented from nothing. The US government has been pushing the same direction. NASA started requiring supply chain visibility reporting in June 2024. Prime contractors on major programs now have to report their sub-tier suppliers. Why? Because nobody fully knows. The Pentagon relies on over 200,000 suppliers, and a 2025 GAO report found the data barely tracks origin. Federal procurement data lists the United States as country of origin for about 96% of the defense goods purchased. Sounds reassuring, right? Except that field doesn't capture where the components inside came from. The visibility basically stops at the first tier of suppliers. Here's what that looks like in practice. Lockheed Martin found Chinese-made magnets in the F-35 supply chain. Twice. In 2023 and 2024, production paused for months. Waivers had to be issued, and nobody found those magnets through a fancy system. The contractor self-reported them. There's more. Officials visiting the F-35 assembly line spotted robotic arms from a German manufacturer that had since been bought by a Chinese company. The fix? Disconnect the robots from the internet. And federal contracting rules already restrict Hikvision, Dahua, Huawei, and ZTE equipment for exactly this reason. But equipment is one thing, people are another. So how did a person's passport become an export control issue? There's an actual legal answer. In American law, exporting doesn't only mean putting something on a plane. There's a category called a deemed export, and it changes everything. Under ITAR, releasing controlled technical data to a foreign person inside the United States is an export to every country where that person holds citizenship. Read that again. The blueprint never leaves the room, but legally it just crossed a border. Because of who was looking at it, now add ITAR section 126.1, which lists China under a policy of denial for defense articles. Chinese national controlled data denial country. Compliance says stop, but, and this is important, export control law does not say exclude all foreigners. It says control who can access controlled technology. The Justice Department made exactly that argument in 2023 when it sued SpaceX for refusing to hire asylees and refugees. DOJ said export laws impose no such hiring restriction and that asylees and refugees stand on equal footing with citizens under those laws. Musk called it lawfare. And in February 2025, under a new administration, the Justice Department dropped the case. So the argument never got settled, which leaves us here. The law says manage access, but companies facing supply chains too complex to map reach for a blunter filter. Nationality. Now I need to be careful here, and I want you to be careful with me. This next part is where stories like this go wrong. Why does a Chinese passport specifically get flagged, when the engineer holding it is probably just an engineer trying to do good work? The answer security professionals give isn't about character, it's about law. China's National Intelligence Law, passed in 2017, Article 7, It says all organizations and citizens shall support, assist, and cooperate with national intelligence work. Article 14 lets agencies request that assistance. So the question a risk officer asks isn't, is this person good? It's whose legal system can put pressure on this person. That's called jurisdiction risk. And it is not the same thing as saying Chinese people are dangerous. Those are genuinely different claims. The reporting concerns Chinese nationals, not Chinese Americans, not citizens, not green card holders, not Taiwanese or Singaporean engineers. That distinction matters enormously. But here's the honest problem. Distinctions that clean on paper get messy in a hallway, and that's the part policy documents never really address. Let's zoom out because SpaceX didn't invent this instinct. It inherited it from something much larger that's been building for a decade. The old globalization question was simple. Where is it cheapest? Where is it fastest? Where's the quality good enough? Answer those. Ship it. The new question is different. Will this supply chain survive a crisis? Can this equipment be turned against us? Can this person be pressured? Political scientists have a word for this. Securitization. When something ordinary, hiring, purchasing, shipping, gets reclassified as a matter of national survival. In 2023, the G7 tried to draw a line at Hiroshima. Not decoupling, they said. De-risking and diversifying, a narrower, calmer idea. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen pushed friendshoring. Rebuild supply chains around countries you trust. Free trade, but secure. That was the official language. And this is still live. In August 2026, China barred dealings with 7 American entities and tightened drone export reviews answering fresh U.S. restrictions. SpaceX's supplier audit isn't an outlier. It's what de-risking looks like when it stops being a communique and walks into a factory. So why would a company accept an expensive HR decision? Here's the calculation I think explains it better than any theory about Musk. Talent loss is slow. Hiring gets harder. Costs creep up. Morale erodes. You lose a little every quarter and barely notice it. Security failure isn't slow. One leak, one prohibited component, one investigation, and a government contract, a program, a reputation goes up at once. That asymmetry is the whole story. Slow bleeding versus sudden explosion. Which one would you protect against if the company were yours? I can follow that logic. I can also tell you exactly where it breaks. Nationality is a very blunt instrument for a precise problem. It doesn't measure what someone can access, what clearance they hold, or what they've actually done. It measures the cover of a passport, and blunt instruments spread. A rule aimed at nationals gets absorbed by a workplace as suspicion of anyone who looks or sounds Chinese, which is why the research keeps finding the same thing. The wall built to stop an espionage case also stops the graduate student behind it. So where does that leave us? America became a technology superpower partly because it took the best people from everywhere and didn't ask too hard. And now some of what those people built has become so strategic, so close to weapons, that ordinary business rules don't feel sufficient anymore. So the question on the form is changing. Not just how good are you, but also, which country can claim you? Is that security or exclusion? Or is it just the new border of a technological Cold War? Having heard all this today, what do you think? That's a wrap for today.